welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the difference between the Glock 17 and the Glock 34. So before we get started, I will say that this one, the Glock 17, is a Gen 4 and my Glock 34 is a Gen 5. And if you look at my other video, you can see the differences between the gens. We'll get into that later on. But so we're just going to start off by going over some general stats between the two. And remember, all these stats are with none of the mods that you see on it, just straight out of the box. Glock 17, Glock 34, standard factory made specs. So getting into it, and really the biggest fundamental difference between the Glock 34 and the Glock 17, it's maybe kind of obvious. You can use the flashlight as a unit of measure of reference, but the slide length, okay? So the Glock 34 has a slide length of 5.31 inches, which also is produces the highest muzzle velocity of any Glock on the market, including all different calibers. The 9mm Glock 34 is the highest muzzle velocity on the market. The Glock 17 runs a 4.48 inch barrel. These are both the exact same flashlights with the exact same lowers. The 17 and 34 have the same lowers, so you can see the difference on how far the barrel comes out on the 34. It's flush with the light, and how far the barrel comes out on the 17 is a little bit recessed from the light. So you can use that as a frame of reference. With that being said, with the slide being longer than the 34, you get what's called you have what's called a sight radius. Okay, the sight radius is the distance between the rear sight and the front sight. And the Glock 34 stouts a very large 7.55 inch sight radius, which is actually the longest sight radius of any Glock there is, and we'll get into that soon. The Glock 17 rocks a 6.49 inch sight radius. That's almost an inch difference between the two. Going into the trigger pull, so, well, just for you guys, all these guns are pre-cleared. If anybody was concerned, there's nothing. But so the trigger pull on the 34 is 4.5 pounds. So the trigger pull means in order to depress the trigger and pull it all the way back until you hear the click and hear the firing of the mechanisms inside, you have to apply 4.5 pounds of pressure to this trigger. For the Glock 17, it's 5.5. Not this trigger specifically, it's aftermarket trigger, but remember, it's supposed to be a factory-made gun. The trigger factory-made is 5.5 pounds. So 5.5 pound pull, it'll go off. So same thing, you got about a pound difference between the two. Getting into magazine capacity, so they both hold 17 rounds. Remember, this Zev and this Glock Store +2 base plates are aftermarket, but factory base plates, they both come 17 and 17, and actually both mags are interchangeable between each gun. So if you own a 17 and you have a bunch of mags and you go out and you buy yourself a 34, those mags can go from the 17 into the 34 and vice versa. So weight unloaded, the Glock 34 weighs in at 25.77 ounces, and the Glock 17 weighs in at 25.06 ounces. Another major difference between the two is that the 34 comes with a pre-cut RMR plate. RMR stands for red dot, or rail mounted red dot, which is, I have this Leupold Delta Point Pro right here, but it comes pre-cut into the slide to where you can buy a plate kit and mount an RMR. So again, this is an aftermarket slide for this Glock 17, but a factory one does not come with this RMR cut. So if you want it, you either need to purchase a aftermarket slide or pay a machinist to cut it out. I wouldn't recommend cutting it out by yourself. You're probably gonna mess it up. So they're both 9mm. They both shoot 9x19 millimeter bullets. Same thing, interchangeable. They also, one thing of note is that the 17 is considered the Glock's full size. So this is a full size platform, which means, someone like me has bigger hands that fit. This is the full size, whereas the 19 is a compact version. It's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit harder for me to get my hands in there. So the 17 and the 34 both have the same pistol grip length. So this both the same size. And you can exacerbate that size if you want to use the beaver tails like I talked about in my last video on this 34. But you can input a beaver tail, and you can get a little bit more thickness of the pistol grip. And for people that have bigger hands, that allow a bigger reach or a bigger grip on your pistol, as well as the support from the actual beaver tail itself. So with that being said, let's discuss on why those stats are important and what that means when you go to purchase your first gun, or if you want to purchase another gun, or if you're trying to do a competition, or just trying to figure out which Glock is right for you. So with all that being said, with the Glock, with the 34 being longer sight radius, it holds the same amount of ammunition, and it is the same weight. For basically $150 more, you get all of that plus the RMR cutout in comparison to the 17. So the 34 kind of targets a competition shooter or a combat shooter. So a lot of special operations forces uses the Glock 34. A lot of competition shooters use Glock 34. A lot of gun enthusiasts use Glock 34 because of how mod accepting they are. I mean, they take the rails, they take the optics, they hold the same amount of ammo, they got longer sights. It's just overall, right out of the box, a great competition gun. Whereas a 17, you kind of have to do a little bit of things to it, like purchase these aftermarket slides, better springs, better barrels, to make it kind of compete with the 34. You can still do that with the 34, but out of the box, this is a much more race-worthy gun, whether that be in competition or for your life in combat. Also, with this slide being a little bit longer, it does make it a little less snappy. Okay, so all that pressure is building up, and as the bullet travels, remember, it's got an inch bigger than the 17, so all that pressure builds and builds and builds and builds, and it gets released 1 inch further away from your hand. The closer the pressure release or the muzzle velocity is expressed in the real world, the further away it is from your hand, the less recoil you feel. The closer it is to your hand, the more recoil you feel. That's why if you shoot like a 38 special where it's a very snub nose, it's very snappy because it's right against your hand. And that's why when you shoot an AR, even though it's a much bigger bullet, the recoil is felt a lot less because the muzzle is so much further away from you, and it's expressed, feet away from you in comparison to inches. So one last run through. It weighs essentially the same. It holds the same amount of bullets. It's longer. It takes a red dot. It's got a lighter trigger pull, and it's only basically $100, $150 more depending on where you buy it in comparison to the 34. I give my vote to the 34. The 17 never did me wrong. I love it. I obviously have one. I've shot it for I've shot a lot of rounds, so I had it for a long time. But I give my vote to the 34. You guys tell me what you think. Do you guys like the 34 or the 17? Comment down below, like and subscribe, and thanks for coming and checking it out.